The lifestyle of Richard Smallwood House Tour. Cause of death. No children cars. Net worth. What if one of the most powerful voices in American gospel never chased fame, never built a tabloid life, and still changed the world? Richard Smallwood didn't dominate headlines, he dominated moments. His music has been heard at funerals, national ceremonies, and the darkest hours of millions of lives, yet his story remains largely untold. Today, we pull back the curtain on a legacy built on faith, discipline, and quiet excellence. Stay with us to the end because this is not just a story about music. This is about impact. Subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and let's remember greatness the right way. The man behind the music. Richard Smallwood stands as the undeniable central figure of modern gospel music, a man whose life story mirrors the depth and power of his compositions. Born on November 30th, 1948 in Atlanta, Georgia, Smallwood grew up during a period marked by racial tension, limited opportunity, and deep reliance on faith within Black communities. Music and church were inseparable parts of daily life, and they quickly became his refuge. When his family later relocated to Washington, D.C., the move proved pivotal. The city's vibrant spiritual and cultural landscape offered both challenge and possibility, shaping the environment where his gifts would fully emerge. Washington, D.C. would ultimately become not just his home, but the spiritual and creative center of his life's work. From an early age, Smallwood displayed extraordinary musical ability. By the age of 5, he could play the piano by ear, astonishing adults and peers alike. This rare talent, however, was not met with ease. He was a quiet child, often misunderstood, and faced moments of isolation and self-doubt. Yet those struggles sharpened his focus rather than diminishing it. Encouraged by family and nurtured by the church, he devoted countless hours to practice studying both sacred music and classical traditions. His academic pursuit at Howard University further refined his skills, blending disciplined musical theory with spiritual expression. This foundation set him apart, allowing him to approach gospel not simply as performance, but as structured, intentional composition. As his career unfolded, Richard Smallwood emerged as a defining symbol of contemporary gospel. In the late 1970s and 1980s, his work introduced a sophisticated sound that fused classical harmonies, jazz influences, and traditional gospel themes. Through ensembles such as the Richard Smallwood Singers and later Vision, he created music that demanded excellence while remaining deeply accessible. Songs like Total Praise and I Love the Lord transcended church walls, becoming staples at national events, funerals, weddings, and global worship services. His compositions were not trend-driven. They were timeless, rooted in scripture and emotional truth. This balance earned him critical acclaim, multiple major award nominations, and lasting respect across generations. Beyond accolades, Smallwood's true legacy lies in impact. His music became a language of faith during moments of collective grief and personal struggle, resonating far beyond the United States. Choirs around the world continue to perform his works often decades after their release. Even as health challenges later limited his public presence, his influence never faded. Richard Smallwood redefined what gospel music could sound like and what it could achieve, proving that spiritual integrity and artistic excellence need not compete. His journey from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., from prodigy to pioneer, cemented him not only as a gospel icon, but as a global voice of faith whose work continues to uplift, instruct, and endure. Roots, faith, and early struggles. Mabel Smallwood and Reverend Chester Smallwood formed the emotional and spiritual foundation of Richard Smallwood's life long before his name became synonymous with gospel excellence. Growing up in the American South during the post-war era, Richard entered a world shaped by segregation, racial tension, and limited opportunity for Black families. Daily life demanded resilience. Neighborhoods were divided, resources were scarce, and the church often stood as the safest space for dignity and hope. In this environment, family was not merely a support system, it was a shield. The values Richard would later express through music were first modeled at home, where faith was not theoretical, but necessary for survival. Mabel Smallwood. His mother embodied quiet strength. She worked tirelessly to keep the household afloat, often under financial strain that left little room for comfort or security. There were no luxuries, and even basic needs required careful planning. Yet Mabel never allowed hardship to harden her spirit. She believed deeply in prayer discipline and moral consistency, and she passed those beliefs to her son through example rather than instruction. She recognized Richard's musical gift early, encouraging him even when resources for formal training were limited. Her steady presence taught him patience, humility, and gratitude, qualities that later distinguished him in an industry often driven by ego. In many ways, her sacrifices became the unseen rhythm behind his compositions. When the family later relocated to Washington, D.C., Reverend Chester Smallwood emerged as a defining influence. A devoted pastor, he introduced Richard to a theology rooted in endurance and service. His sermons emphasized that praise was not a reaction to comfort, but a response to struggle. One phrase repeated often, "Praise is your anchor," became a guiding principle in Richard's life. The church was not only a place of worship, it was a classroom, rehearsal hall, and refuge. Under his stepfather's guidance, Richard learned that faith demanded responsibility to community, not retreat from it. This message would later shape how he viewed music as ministry rather than performance. Together, Mabel and Reverend Chester provided the emotional stability that allowed Richard Smallwood's creativity to flourish. When he faced bullying, self-doubt, or rejection in his early years, it was their encouragement that kept him grounded. They framed adversity as preparation, not punishment. Music in their home was never separated from character. Discipline at the piano mattered as much as integrity in life. That balance became the hallmark of Smallwood's artistry, structured, reverent, and emotionally honest. Long before audiences heard his compositions, his worldview had already been formed by a mother's sacrifice and a pastor's conviction. Their influence did not merely shape a musician. It shaped a man whose faith would later resonate across generations and continents. Training a gospel visionary. Richard Smallwood entered the professional phase of his life with a level of preparation rare in gospel music at the time. After completing high school in Washington, D.C., he enrolled at Howard University, one of America's most prestigious historically black universities. There, Smallwood pursued formal training in classical music and vocal performance, graduating cum laude. His education exposed him to rigorous disciplines, counterpoint orchestration, choral arranging, and Western classical theory, while still allowing space for spiritual expression. This dual foundation proved critical. Rather than abandoning gospel for classical music, Smallwood envisioned a future where both could coexist, elevating church music without diluting its spiritual core. Howard University did more than sharpen his technical skill. It expanded his worldview. Surrounded by scholars, musicians, and activists, Smallwood learned to see music as both art and cultural responsibility. He studied European composers while remaining rooted in the black church tradition, an approach that challenged conventional boundaries. Professors recognized his exceptional ear and compositional instinct, while peers saw him as unusually disciplined and introspective. During this period, he began arranging music for choirs and churches across Washington, D.C., quietly building a reputation for excellence. These early experiences taught him how to communicate complex musical ideas in ways that congregations could feel, even if they could not name the theory behind them. In 1977, Smallwood took a decisive step by forming the Richard Smallwood Singers, a vocal ensemble designed to bring his musical vision to life. The group stood apart from traditional gospel C-wires. Their sound was structured harmonically dense and emotionally restrained, favoring precision over spectacle. Drawing from classical choral techniques, jazz phrasing, and sacred texts, Smallwood crafted arrangements that demanded discipline from performers and attentiveness from listeners. The ensemble quickly gained recognition within gospel circles for its originality, performing in churches, concerts, and special events. This period marked his true entry into the professional music world not through commercial hype, but through consistency and musical integrity. The release of the Richard Smallwood Singer's debut album in the early 1980s confirmed that his approach was not only innovative, but sustainable. The project established the blueprint for what would become his signature-style gospel music, enriched by classical structure and subtle jazz, influence anchored firmly in scripture and reverence. Critics praised the sophistication of the arrangements, while audiences responded to the emotional depth. Rather than chasing trends, Smallwood positioned himself as a composer, first allowing his work to mature organically. This debut did more than launch a career. It reshaped expectations for gospel music. By merging academic discipline with spiritual authenticity, Richard Smallwood demonstrated that gospel could be intellectually rigorous, culturally relevant, and profoundly moving all at once. Rising through sacred sound. The peak of Richard Smallwood's career arrived when his music crossed a rare boundary, moving from church sanctuaries into the heart of mainstream culture without losing its spiritual authority. A defining moment came in 1996 when Whitney Houston recorded "I Love the Lord" for the soundtrack of The Preacher's Wife. The song was not rewritten or modernized for radio appeal. It was presented with reverence and restraint, allowing Smallwood's original composition to stand intact. Houston's performance introduced millions of listeners, many outside the gospel tradition, to the emotional depth and theological clarity of his work, elevating him from a revered church composer to a nationally recognized musical voice. While "I Love the Lord" opened the mainstream door, "Total Praise" became the song that sealed Smallwood's global legacy. Written in 1996 during a period of personal grief and uncertainty, the composition was built on scripture and simplicity rather than spectacle. Its restrained opening, gradual harmonic rise, and climactic declaration of faith resonated universally. The song spread rapidly across denominations, cultures, and continents, becoming a staple at funerals, weddings, memorials, and national observances. Choirs around the world embraced it not as performance material, but as collective prayer. Few gospel works have achieved such longevity and consistency, and Total Praise remains one of the most performed sacred compositions of the late 20th century. The reach of Smallwood's music expanded further as younger and more contemporary artists embraced his work. Destiny's Child famously performed Total Praise in live settings, and medleys bridging gospel tradition with modern R&B audiences. These performances did not dilute the song's meaning. Instead, they reinforced its adaptability and emotional power. Beyond headline names, Smallwood's compositions have been covered by countless choirs, soloists, and worship ensembles worldwide. They moved freely beyond church walls into concert halls, civic ceremonies, and educational institutions, proving that sacred music, when written with integrity, can resonate across cultural and generational lines. Recognition followed naturally. Over the course of his career, Richard Smallwood received 8 Grammy nominations, reflecting industry acknowledgement of both artistic excellence and spiritual impact. He also earned multiple Dove Awards and Stellar Awards honors that specifically celebrate achievement within Christian and gospel music. These accolades, however, never altered his focus. Rather than chasing awards or commercial trends, Smallwood continued to compose with discipline and humility, allowing his work to speak for itself. His peak years were not defined by chart positions, but by influence, songs sung when words failed, harmonies that carried faith through grief and celebration alike. In reaching the heights of his career, Richard Smallwood did something rare. He proved that gospel music could achieve worldwide prominence without sacrificing its soul. When gospel reached the White House. The career of Richard Smallwood reached a rare and symbolic height when his music entered the highest levels of American public life. Over the course of his career, Smallwood was invited to perform for 3 U.S. presidents, an achievement that placed gospel music within spaces traditionally reserved for political ceremony and national reflection. These appearances were not entertainment bookings. They were acknowledgments of gospel's role in the moral and cultural fabric of the nation. By standing at that intersection, Smallwood helped redefine sacred music as a voice worthy of national attention. The first of these historic moments came during the era of Jimmy Carter, whose presidency was marked by an open expression of Christian faith. Carter's willingness to include gospel music in formal settings signaled a respect for its spiritual and cultural importance, particularly within Black American communities. Smallwood's compositions, rooted in scripture and reverence, aligned naturally with that tone. His presence in such settings affirmed that gospel was not merely a church tradition, but a serious musical and spiritual language capable of addressing national conscience, humility, and service. That bridge widened during the presidency of Bill Clinton, a leader known for his deep engagement with Black churches and gospel traditions. Clinton-era events increasingly incorporated sacred music as part of civic observances, memorials, and interfaith gatherings. Smallwood's music, with its classical discipline and emotional restraint, proved especially suited to these moments. Songs like Total Praise carried a tone of solemn reflection rather than performance, making them ideal for settings where unity and dignity were paramount. His involvement during this period reinforced the idea that gospel music could function as both worship and national expression. The symbolic weight of Smallwood's journey reached its fullest expression during the presidency of Barack Obama. Obama's historic election represented a cultural shift, and gospel music played a visible role in the ceremonies and commemorations of that era. Smallwood's work, long embraced by Black churches, now resonated on a national stage that reflected broader inclusion. His music underscored moments of remembrance, hope, and resilience, demonstrating how gospel could speak across political lines without becoming politicized. In these settings, the message remained unchanged, faith anchored in humility and gratitude. Through performances connected to 3 presidential administrations, Richard Smallwood helped usher gospel music into the realm of national ritual. He did so without altering its theology or softening its spiritual core. Instead, his compositions offered a steady presence music that invited reflection rather than applause. By occupying these civic spaces, Smallwood proved that gospel music belongs not only to church pews, but also to moments when a nation pauses to remember, to mourn, and to hope. His role in these historic performances stands as one of the clearest examples of how sacred music can shape public life with grace, dignity, and enduring relevance. Homes that reflected his journey. Richard Smallwood built a lifestyle that mirrored the structure and restraint of his music, measured, intentional, and grounded in purpose rather than display. His real estate choices reveal this philosophy clearly. In Washington, D.C., where much of his professional life unfolded, Smallwood owned his primary residence, widely valued at approximately $5 million. This home functioned as far more than a symbol of success. It served as a creative base, a gathering place for fellow musicians, and a private refuge from the public eye. Architectural elegance existed, but it was understated, emphasizing comfort, acoustics, and thoughtful design over extravagance. The Washington, D.C. property was carefully arranged to support his work. Dedicated music rooms allowed for late-night composition and rehearsal, while quiet sitting areas encouraged reflection and prayer. High ceilings and open layouts enhanced sound, reflecting his sensitivity to musical space. The home balanced hospitality and solitude, enabling Smallwood to host collaborators while maintaining boundaries essential to his personal discipline. Rather than a showcase mansion, it was a working environment, one that reflected a man who viewed music as ministry and craft, not as celebrity branding. In Atlanta, his birthplace, Smallwood maintained a second home valued at roughly $3 million, purchased after his induction into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. This residence carried emotional significance, reconnecting him with family roots and the spiritual soil from which his journey began. The Atlanta home emphasized warmth and familiarity rather than formality. It was used for rest, family gatherings, and songwriting retreats, offering distance from professional demands. One room was often described as a prayer and meditation space, reinforcing how deeply faith remained woven into his daily routine. The home symbolized continuity, linking childhood memories to later success, without abandoning humility. In his later years, health concerns reshaped his priorities. Smallwood acquired a more modest property in Sandy Spring, Maryland, estimated at around $2 million, selected for its quiet surroundings and proximity to medical facilities. This residence reflected a shift from productivity to preservation. The layout favored accessibility, natural light, and calm, supporting recovery and comfort as he faced kidney disease and other health challenges. Here, the focus was not legacy building, but well-being. The home offered privacy space for close friends and an atmosphere conducive to peace rather than performance. Across all three properties, a consistent theme emerged: restraint. Richard Smallwood's homes were not designed to impress tabloids or social media audiences. They were environments shaped around music healing and spiritual grounding. There were no reports of lavish parties or excessive indulgence, only spaces that supported a life of discipline and reflection. His real estate portfolio reflected success earned over decades, yet never detached from values formed in modest beginnings. In a culture that often equates wealth with visibility, Smallwood chose quiet dignity. His lifestyle, rooted in purpose, not spectacle, stood as a final harmony between faith, art, and personal integrity. Success on wheels. Richard Smallwood approached material success with the same restraint and intentionality that defined his music, and his choice of vehicles reflected milestones rather than excess. Unlike celebrities who collect cars for status alone, Smallwood's automobiles symbolized chapters of a long, disciplined journey. Each vehicle entered his life at a specific moment, marking achievement, responsibility, or service. Together, they told a quiet story of progress, one earned through decades of compositional excellence, spiritual leadership, and cultural influence. At the pinnacle of that journey stood the Rolls-Royce Phantom, valued at approximately $1 million. This vehicle represented arrival, not indulgence. Acquired after his induction into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame and the worldwide recognition of his catalog, the Phantom was reserved for rare ceremonial occasions. It carried him to award events, formal gatherings, and milestone appearances, where his presence symbolized the elevation of gospel music itself. Inside its serene, insulated cabin, Smallwood reportedly found moments of reflection rather than display. The Phantom's significance lay less in luxury and more in symbolism. It marked the point where a church-rooted composer had earned global respect without compromising spiritual integrity. Balancing that formality was the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, a vehicle valued around $200,000 and used as his primary mode of transportation for much of his later career. Reliable, discreet, and technologically refined, the S-Class aligned with Smallwood's daily rhythm. It carried him between rehearsals, recording sessions, universities, and churches across the country. During long drives, he often reviewed arrangements or quietly reflected, treating travel time as an extension of his creative process. The Mercedes embodied practicality, paired with excellence, much like his compositions, sophisticated, purposeful, and never flashy for its own sake. Perhaps the most revealing vehicle in his collection was the Cadillac Escalade, valued at roughly $100,000. Unlike the Phantom, this SUV was closely tied to community engagement. It was frequently used to transport choir members, assist with church functions, and support outreach initiatives. Stories shared by those close to him recall Smallwood using the Escalade during winter storms to help neighbors or move supplies for charitable efforts. In this sense, the vehicle became an extension of his ministry. It reflected a man who viewed success as responsibility, not separation, and who remained accessible despite his stature. Taken together, Richard Smallwood's vehicles formed a narrative rather than a collection. The Rolls-Royce marked recognition, the Mercedes-Benz represented daily discipline, and the Cadillac symbolized service. None contradicted the others. Instead, they revealed different dimensions of a life lived with intention. In an industry where material symbols often overshadow meaning, Smallwood's choices reinforced his values. His cars did not define him, they followed him, arriving only after decades of consistency and faith. As with his music, every detail served a purpose, proving that achievement can be acknowledged without becoming the center of one's identity. A life without spotlight. Drama. Richard Smallwood lived a personal life that stood in quiet contrast to the visibility of his professional success. He never married and had no children, a reality he neither dramatized nor publicly explained at length. Instead, Smallwood treated this aspect of his life with dignity, allowing his actions to speak for his priorities. Free from the obligations of a traditional family structure, he invested his time and emotional energy into spiritual responsibility, creative discipline, and service. For audiences accustomed to celebrity narratives filled with romance and scandal, his life offered something rarer: consistency, privacy, and intentional focus. That focus became most evident in his commitment to mentorship and education. Smallwood viewed gospel music not as a personal platform, but as a communal inheritance that required careful stewardship. He regularly mentored young musicians, choir directors, and composers, emphasizing musical literacy, humility, and faith-driven purpose. His workshops, often held at churches, universities, and faith-based conferences, were known for their rigor. Participants were expected to understand harmony, structure, and scripture, not simply perform with emotion. This educational approach aligned with his broader involvement in organizations such as the Gospel Music Association, where he advocated for artistic excellence and long-term support for emerging gospel artists. Philanthropy also played a central role in Smallwood's personal mission. While he avoided publicizing donations, those close to him confirmed consistent support for church initiatives, music scholarships, and community outreach programs. He believed gospel music should uplift beyond performance, extending into tangible acts of service. His charitable involvement reflected his upbringing, where faith and action were inseparable. Whether funding educational opportunities or lending his presence to benefit events, Smallwood approached giving as an extension of worship rather than recognition. This mindset reinforced his standing as a trusted elder within the gospel community, respected not only for his talent, but for his integrity. Inevitably, his distinct musical approach invited discussion. In the 1990s and early 2000s, some traditionalists questioned his fusion of classical structure with gospel expression, labeling it overly formal or distant from congregational spontaneity. Rather than responding defensively, Smallwood addressed such critiques through dialogue. In interviews and panel discussions, he emphasized unity over division, arguing that gospel music had room for multiple expressions rooted in the same spiritual truth. He maintained that discipline and reverence did not weaken worship, but deepened it. His calm, thoughtful responses transformed potential controversy into conversation, earning him respect even among critics. In the absence of a conventional family life, Richard Smallwood cultivated a broader sense of kinship, one rooted in faith, mentorship, and shared purpose. His personal choices reflected a man who measured fulfillment not by legacy and bloodlines, but by impact across generations. Through teaching, service, and open dialogue, he demonstrated that a life devoted to community could be as rich and enduring as any traditional path. In doing so, Smallwood expanded the definition of success, showing that devotion to calling can build a family far larger than one's own household. The final battle and farewell. The passing of Richard Smallwood marked a profound moment of collective loss for the gospel community and beyond. On December 30th, 2025, Smallwood died at the age of 77 due to complications from kidney failure following a period of declining health that had gradually removed him from public life. True to his private nature, details of his condition were kept largely out of the spotlight, known mainly to close friends and family. When the news broke, it resonated deeply, not because of shock, but because of reverence. His death felt like the closing of a sacred chapter, one written slowly, faithfully, and without compromise. Almost immediately, tributes began to pour in from across the gospel world. Among the most prominent voices was Yolanda Adams, who honored Smallwood as a spiritual architect whose music shaped generations of worshipers. Adams spoke not only of his compositions, but of his character, his humility, discipline, and unwavering commitment to excellence. She described his songs as safe places for believers during moments of grief, uncertainty, and praise. Her words echoed a shared sentiment that Smallwood's music had often spoken when individuals could not find words of their own. Kirk Franklin also paid tribute, recognizing Smallwood as a foundational influence on contemporary gospel music. Franklin acknowledged that while styles and sounds evolved, the structural integrity and spiritual seriousness Smallwood brought to gospel remained unmatched. He credited Smallwood with proving that gospel music could be intellectually rigorous, emotionally restrained, and spiritually powerful all at once. For many younger artists, these tributes served as a reminder that their freedom to experiment existed because someone before them had established respect for the genre on the highest artistic level. Beyond individual statements, the collective response revealed the scope of Smallwood's legacy. Choirs across the United States and around the world gathered to sing "Total Praise I Love the Lord" and "Center of My Joy" in his honor. Social media filled with rehearsal clips, church performances, and quiet moments of worship dedicated to his memory. Memorial services emphasized music rather than spectacle, reflecting the way Smallwood himself lived. His funeral arrangements were kept private, aligning with his lifelong preference for dignity over display, while plans for scholarship funds and kidney disease awareness initiatives ensured that his passing would inspire continued service. Though Richard Smallwood's voice is now silent, his music remains remarkably alive. His compositions continue to be taught in choirs, studied in music programs, and sung in moments of national and personal significance. Few artists achieve such endurance without constant reinvention, but Smallwood's work endures precisely because it never chased trends. Rooted in scripture, shaped by classical discipline, and delivered with reverence, his songs continue to offer comfort, structure, and hope. In death, as in life, Richard Smallwood stands as a testament to the power of faith expressed through excellence. His legacy does not fade. It resonates steady and unshaken wherever voices rise in praise. A legacy that still sings. As this story comes to a close, Richard Smallwood reminds us that some legacies do not end with a final breath. His life's work continues to move through churches, concert halls, living rooms, and moments of private prayer around the world. Long after December 30th, 2025, his compositions still rise where words fall short at funerals, memorials, weddings, and national gatherings. This is the rare mark of an artist whose influence is not bound by time. His music did not depend on his physical presence to remain relevant. It was built to endure, anchored in faith structure and emotional truth. What makes Smallwood's legacy so powerful is its consistency. He never reinvented himself to chase relevance, never softened his message for approval, and never allowed recognition to dilute purpose. Each song carried the same quiet conviction: faith expressed with discipline is still faith. That is why his work continues to resonate across generations. Younger artists study his harmonies. Choir directors rely on his arrangements. Worshippers return to his songs during life's most difficult hours. His influence lives not in headlines but in repetition, in the way his music is sung again and again, often decades after it was written. Now we invite you to become part of that living legacy. Think back over your own life. Which Richard Smallwood song met you at a turning point? Was it total praise during a moment of loss? I love the Lord in a season of gratitude? Or center of my joy? When hope felt distant, share that song in the comments. Your memory may echo someone else's story, reminding them they are not alone. Gospel music has always been communal, and Smallwood's work was written to be shared, not stored away. As we end this video, one truth stands firm and uncomplicated. He didn't just sing gospel, he lived it. Richard Smallwood's life reflected the same principles as his music: reverence, restraint, and purpose. There was no separation between belief and behavior, between composition and character. His legacy is not measured only by awards or acclaim, but by the lives steadied through his songs. If this story moved, you take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more in-depth journeys into cultural legacy, and keep these conversations alive. Because as long as his music is sung, Richard Smallwood's voice still speaks. As we reflect on the life and legacy of Richard Smallwood, one question lingers beyond the music. His songs continue to fill churches and comfort souls long after his passing, proving that true influence does not fade with time. Yet in today's fast-moving industry where trends often overshadow substance, can a faith-centered legacy like Smallwood's still shape future generations the same way, or has gospel's role in culture fundamentally changed? At Legends of Black Excellence, we ask you to weigh in. Do timeless compositions still matter more than visibility and charts, or has the definition of impact evolved?